We made this.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Hello everyone and welcome to Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast on the We Made This podcast network. Alright dudes, my name is Kurt North and I am your host this week, and as always I have my co-host with me, Mark Adams. Mark, it's been a while since we've spoken, officially, so how are you doing, mate? How's things going?
I'm alright, yeah. I was trying to think of a witty Red Dwarfy way to respond to that, but you've already said alright dudes, so I'm done.
Okay, fair enough. Think of one for next time. And with us is a first-time guest in the shape of Matt Latham. Matt, it's been a while since I've spoken to you. Actually, how are things on your end of the country, down in good old Birmingham area? How's things going down there?
It's going okay at the moment. The weather's decent for once. We've had a couple of days of iffy weather, but yeah, it's nice to look out the window and see sun for a bit.
Iffy is such a West Midlands word to use, Matt. Absolutely confirming where you're from there.
Fantastic. Well, it's overcast here, I think. Having said that, I have only been awake for about 20 minutes, so I haven't probably looked out yet. But yes, it's overcast here. So we are almost at the end. We've got this episode and next week's, and that is the end of season 1. That's come around really quickly. And, as we have done over the past few episodes with the new guests, we have an officer's exam, which is something that we don't tell guests that they're having until they come on. So we'll drop them right into it. Matt, are you ready for this? We're going to give you a few questions to see if you can pass the exam.
Yeah, I'm ready as I'll ever be.
Okay, let's go then. So the first question would be, when did you discover Red Dwarf, or what was your first memory of it, if you don't remember the exact kind of, the exact memory of actually seeing it first time, but your first thoughts on it?
I can't remember exactly, but I do remember I do remember watching, I think, Summer Series 6 when it came out. I'm pretty sure I actually watched Series 6 finale on when it first aired, because I always remembered, and I'm pretty sure they used to repeat it all the time, but I can't remember exactly whereabouts it was, unfortunately, but I'm going to go around where Series 6 was airing. Right, okay, that's fine. And did you after that go straight back? Do you remember going back through the seasons in order at any points, or did you just catch them as they've been on BBC? I think I've caught them as they went on BBC, really, and I remember watching Series 7 when it aired, because I was a fan at that point, and Series 8, and then I remember getting the DVDs. So I've got like particularly when the first 8 series came on DVD with the coloured scheme with all the extras and stuff. Definitely got all them. I remember getting them when they came out straight away. Yeah, but I can't remember. I really can't remember. I can't pinpoint a moment when I first remembered it, unfortunately. No, I don't think you're alone with that. It's one of those. I mean, it was so long ago. It was 1988 when it came out. So it's it's over the years. I mean, it's not even like 8 years that it was on, was it? Because season 8 had a gap, season 7 had a gap between season 6. And I was been listening to likes of Rob Grant and Ed Bye speak on the Red Dwarf kind of reviews that they're doing, because we're currently in quarantine at the moment, and they're doing the episodes and just talking about how they put them together and things, and we've mentioned this on the podcast as well. It kind of formulated in my mind that they said about season 1 not being once season 1 came out, that didn't come back for a while, and it didn't get shown on TV. It was not to be repeated on TV, and I think that there's been a couple of times where people have come onto the show and have said, well, I don't think I remember seeing season 1 till the VHS comes out. And that explains why, really. So, I mean, that's one element to it. Now, all the other guests that we've had on, including Mark as well, haven't seen or have only seen elements of the new Dave series from Back to Earth onwards. This isn't a really small or supplementary kind of question. This isn't the major questions that we have. But
Have you seen the some of the Dave stuff? If you have, what have you seen? And if you haven't, why haven't you seen them?
I think I've seen the majority of them. I think there are bits of Series 12 that I haven't. I've definitely seen Series 10 and I think Series 11. Because I have Series 10 on Blu-ray. But I'm pretty sure I ended up watching majority of Series 11 on the UK TV website. And so instead of and I think I've seen bits of 12. I don't know if I've seen all of it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting when we did when I did Don't Mention the Sea with Mark. I completely forgot season 12 existed. but that's another story. Okay, so question 2 would be: what would you consider to be your favourite episode through the entire run of Red Dwarf?
They get harder as well, Matt.
Yeah. Favourite episode? I don't know, actually. It's...
Matt goes to Google. Red Dwarf.
I'm trying not to go to Google. I don't know. I can't think of any favourite episodes. I've got favourite moments, which I think overshadow bits of quality of episodes. So I can't really think of an episode off the top of my head that I can say. There are moments I love, but they conflict with, I think, the overall quality of them. Oh, bloody hell!
You're gonna fail. You won't if you don't pass. If you don't pass, you're not on.
Okay.
No pressure.
I've certainly forgotten every single episode of Red Dwarf. Watch out, we're again. There's a Series 2 episode. I can't remember the name of it exactly. Something for the memory. Thanks for the memory, or...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which I think, where it is the Lisa Yates episode, which I really quite like, because there's a lot of... Because I think it's a very character-focused and quite interesting episode about the relationship between Lister and Rimmer, which I really quite like. And there's a lot of interesting setup and structure in how it's done. So I'm going to go for that one.
Excellent stuff. Now, so the next question would be, what would you consider to be your favourite season?
It's either 4 or 6. And I can't remember why. 6? I think 6 because I think I have memories of watching that. Or bits of it when I was younger. I think 6 might have been my entry season, actually. But, yeah, I think... I want to go for 6, because that's the ones with, is it Gunman of the Apocalypse and, I think, is Rimmerworld in that one?
Gunman of the Apocalypse was. Rimmerworld, wasn't that in 7 when Chris Barry was leaving?
No, definitely wasn't in 7. Yeah, Series 6, yeah, because that's one, it's one with Legion and Polymorph 2 and Out of Time, because I always remember the cliffhanger for Out of Time as well. Which I think is kind of legendary.
The Out of Time, and obviously we didn't return back after Out of Time for quite some time, did we? And I know that because you've watched the Dave ones, the end of season 8 cliffhanger as well works quite well when we find out what happened in season 11. And spoiler alerts, as I say, Mark and the rest of the gang, rest of the boys from the Dwarf haven't seen them, so it's going to be interesting and fun watching them find out the reveal after the end of season 8, so that'll be fun. Right, okay, so that season 6, that's not a bad shout, because season 6 is one of my favourite seasons. I said 3 or 6 originally. So you mentioned moments before. What would you consider to be your favourite moment of the show?
Easily, the Munchkin song from Blue.
That was the episode I was thinking of when you said Rimworld. I got myself ever so confused.
The song is still in my head, and I think if that was the last time we kind of saw Rimmer, then it was probably a very in character and hilarious way to send him off.
Yeah, I mean, season 7. Don't get me wrong, we've had a very, very small discussion on season 7, but it isn't the best of seasons, but it has some absolutely amazing moments in it as well. And I think there's the change in style that has an effect with it. But when you look at that Rimmer episode with the send off of Rimmer, that is a particular highlight and low light at the same time, because it's Chris Barry's last episode. I think he's in one more after that one, isn't he? I think that he appears in a cameo in the next one. I think, if my memory serves me right. But yeah, it's a great moment, that, and it's one that, as you say, the song goes around in everyone's heads, I think, and it's a classic moment. So, who would you consider to be your favourite character?
Arnold Rimmer.
Oh, Mark, it's not happened.
It hasn't. We've got a consensus, and I don't agree with it.
Okay.
Sorry, Matt. What happened is, well, Kurt interviewed me and I said the cat. I then asked Kurt and he said Rimmer. I then asked,
Crichton.
Oh, you said
Crichton.
Yes, you said Crichton, and then it was Colin who said Rimmer, wasn't it? No, it was Colin who said Dave Lister, and then it was Carl who said Rimmer, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So we got 4 out of the 5 main characters where each member of the team had picked a different one, and we were kind of hoping you'd pick Holly.
Sorry to disappoint.
Never mind, Matt. Never mind. But why would you consider Rimmer to be your favourite character then? What makes it for you?
I think as well is that I think there's a lot of he's like a very antagonistic character who's there for a reason. You can tell why he's part of the ensemble, and I can see Holly's logic with it. And I think he's just that kind of right side of smarmy and cowardice, and has the same kind of high opinion, which vanishes as soon as he's confronted with it. At the same time, I think he's quite complex. I mean, it's not for season 1 episode to comment on him. I think particularly with the Dave series, there are issues with his general character arc overall. I do think a lot of my favourite moments of it are Rimmer based, and there's a lot of stuff. And I'm a massive fan of Chris Barry, cause, particularly as well because I was a massive fan of the British Empire.
I'm surprised actually, Matt, that the British Empire hasn't come up. I don't think we've mentioned the British Empire at all, Mark, have we?
We haven't yet, but I bloody love the British Empire as well.
Oh no, don't! Oh no.
We're not doing another podcast there.
Okay.
But no, and I think that, particularly that if you watch that, you can kind of see a lot of range from Chris Barry. I mean, I even remember A Prince Among Men when that came out, where Chris Barry basically played Lister if Lister was a famous footballer, an entrepreneur, and a businessman, and all them are on YouTube. I actually watched the first episode, and it hasn't aged that well, and not as funny as I remember it being. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of Chris Barry, and I think a lot, and particularly if you see of his other work, you can kind of see just how much range he's got in terms of a performer. And I think I've always been quite impressed with what he does with Rimmer anyway.
Yeah, no, it's joking aside, I think Chris Barry, we've talked a lot already I know you won't have heard these yet, but over the past 4 episodes, just how good Chris Barry is as an actor, and how much he can portray as well. I think it works really, really well.
Yeah, I think I've decided as we've been talking through these for the first 4 episodes that the cat is still my favourite character. I think Chris Barry is my favourite actor.
I just think he portrays so much, and I think we'll get into that in next week with Me Squared as well. I think there's it's obviously a centerpiece for him. Although we've had a lot of episodes in the first 4, I mean, episode 6, is the one where you can really kind of push the envelope a little bit as well, and that's only the beginning of the journey as well, isn't it? Really.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. So, final question for you, Matt. This is a hard one, and this one, many people have struggled with this question, and I just hope that you can forgive me for asking it. Would you like some toast?
No.
A crumpet?
No.
Fantastic. Okay, so shall we delve into the episode that we're going to discuss today?
Yeah, I reckon so.
Excellent. Let's do this. Right. Okay. So we're talking season 1, episode 5, and it's Confidence and Paranoia, which aired on the 14th of March, 1988. This episode starts with a conversation as usual, the crawl of Holly zipping across the screen, giving us the actual backstory of the season so far, and his little joke about the man who works for the post office. But we jump into the first scene, which is Lister watching a romantic, what sounds like a romantic story on a typical 4:3 TV, which is always good to see. He's drinking a beer milkshake and eating fries and just kind of slobbing about. What did you make to this opening scene, Matt? And it's adding another, not necessarily another layer. We've seen it before, but this kind of romanticising of Lister's character. Really, what did you think to that?
I always think it's quite interesting in terms of how little he thinks of his hygiene and everything. He's very focused on human interaction and connection and basically the idea of romance as well. And it's something that always gets picked up quite a few times, particularly in the first era of Red Dwarf, but I think kind of gets faded in later series, where he longs for a connection with people, and it's always kind of like nice to contrast with the fact that it's Rimmer he has to contend with, because he doesn't have the opportunity to explore that side of him. I think it gives him a kind of goal to eventually get towards, so he doesn't just go too comfortable. Because I don't know if you've, the time recording, I don't know if you discussed about the choice of why Rimmer, but I think if Lister was able to have that without kind of driving towards it, then it will probably crush him if he didn't. Yeah. If it didn't go the way he thinks. So having that kind of romantic dream and chase, and it is. I mean, like what. It is kind of like a rough character arc throughout the first series of actually the quest to get Kachansky's like hologram disc. I think it gives him a quest or hope rather than just like the possible inevitable disappointment that would have happened, I think. So I've always found that a bit interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The as I say, I mentioned earlier about the actual YouTube videos that I've been watching of Rob Grant and Ed By and the like, and they were talking about this episode recently, and they were saying that it's interesting to say character actor get to Kachansky, and we're jumping right to the end here. But the original ending was that Kachansky was going to be the cliffhanger, and that was going to be the end of the season. So the fact that they've built that as an arc, and at the end of episode 5, they've quickly changed it, and then Me Squared, which is coming next week, was kind of thrown together because of the fact that they went one more episode, and the fact that they changed the story. It wasn't going to be Kachansky; it was going to be Rimmer being duplicated and stuff. And I thought that's interesting that you mentioned that, because it is all building to the fact of him getting the girl in some ways, and depending on how the story would have went, it would have gone a lot differently had it been Kachansky at the end. I mean, Mark, what did you think to the opening scene here?
Well, from what you've just said, I'm glad they didn't bring in Kachansky. I think that would have been too soon for them to do that, and Lister being lonely is a huge, huge theme of the show. And I'm glad that they gave it time before they brought in Kachansky, because I think Me Squared is better than any episode where Lister wins could have been, I think. I didn't know that, and like I say, I'm glad it didn't happen. But my first observation was, what the bloody hell did the post office do to the writers? Every one of the Holly gags has been a random dig against a random occupation, but it's not been stuff like, like they've had a go at PE teachers and they've had a go at post office workers. And these aren't like, I don't know, traffic wardens who you would expect them to attack. I've never before or after seen anyone particularly upset with anyone who works at the post office.
wasn't Rimmer named after a prefect, or that one of them went to school with? I think I'm pretty sure him was that, but then and I think the quote was that we didn't base him on his personality because that would have implied that he had one. So they're not. So they have forming their targets, so to speak.
But yeah, I think Matt covered it really. That they're very much emphasising the loneliness and the story arc of how we do expect him to get Kachansky by the end of this first series, I think. And I love the build, and I love that they didn't pay it off as well. I think that was quite subversive.
Yeah, it is interesting now. They actually did go for one more episode, and I think it goes back to that whole "there's no aliens in Red Dwarf" thing as well. I think the idea that they wanted to focus purely on the human drama in a lot of ways, but then using sci-fi as an element, which I think works. By keeping free the idea of not going down the kind of Star Trek route as such, or what any major TV show set in space would do, which would be you go and see an alien of the week, kind of forces them. And Rob Grant has talked about this, that he it forces them to look at different ways of writing stories, and I think that Confidence and Paranoia is another one, case in point, as well as most of the season, really, because you've got Future Echoes, which is the main sci-fi element, but you've got the end, which is the beginning of the story. Waiting for God, we've discussed about recently, but all of them are kind of like stories designed around the human experience, and I think that this one is no different, really. But having Lister in isolation, it's quite relevant for now at the moment, with the whole COVID thing. But yeah, it is interesting, but I think that the romanticizing of Lister works really well as well. I think that having that dichotomy of Lister watching a movie like that, and but then him being slobbish on the counter with his with his t-shirt and the bit where he spits the drink out, which is just terrific. But I really do like that. So what did you make to the Holly interruptions then? I mean, we get this gag returning a few times that I can think of in memory as well, with the deletion of his memory. How did you think that worked, Matt?
I quite like it. I mean, there's because particularly with the first couple of series, when they don't have that much money, they do have a good job of building up and setting up the long form of some payoffs later on. And the Agatha Christie one was actually one that always stuck into my mind. It's not my favourite. It's not my favourite Holly bit. That might come up sooner rather than later. But I do quite like the idea that this scene on computer was like, I've read everything now. I've done everything. Can you can you delete something? Wait, what do you do that for? Who's what? Did I? I don't remember that. And I think it's just perfectly in character, and it has quite a nice payoff later on in the episode, I think.
Yeah, it does, and we'll get into that. But I think also as well, I think it adds to this feeling of Red Dwarf being, just empty, just an empty vessel. That as much as it's a gag, it's they've literally done anything. You've got Lister who's watching a story, and just that slobbish and that kind of bored, but he's into this particular film because he hasn't seen it before. And you've got Holly who's literally seen everything and read everything, and he has to delete his memory because they've reached the epitome of knowledge, and he's bored. And what I like about it is literally someone. I mean, it happens again with the next scene where he's trying to watch it. Lister goes off and he tries to finish it off there, and Rimmer comes in. He keeps getting interrupted, and as much as he's been isolated, he keeps getting interrupted for the very thing that he actually physically wants to do.
Everybody's had one of those days, haven't you, where you're trying to do something that you've been really looking forward to, that you don't want any interruptions, and then all the fucking interruptions in the world happen while you're trying to enjoy something. Everybody's had one of those things, and this is a science fiction sitcom, but this is very much on the sitcom side of the two elements of Red Dwarf. But previously in the episode, not 5 minutes ago, there was very much the science fiction of it, with the human condition explored through remarkable and extraordinary circumstance. So within the first 5 minutes, it's gone, yes, we're sci-fi, but we're also comedy. And they're so good at that with the writing in Red Dwarf. It's something that, particularly as we've been perhaps analysing it more than me sitting down and having a laugh, that I've noticed again and again and again as we've gone through these episodes.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think the depth is there to see. It's there to see when you do look and analyse it in more depth. And I find that with a lot of things as well. I find that there's some comedies which are just out there, but this one is layered, and I really do like that.
There's one thing before we move on from this scene. There is one thing I wanted to ask you both, inspired by it. Holly says that the worst book of all time was the Kevin Keegan book of football or something. I don't agree with that. I wanted to ask you both what you think is the worst book of all time, because I've got 2 candidates.
That is throwing me for a loop.
Right, well, I'll go with mine first then, and you can either agree or come up with something as an alternative. The 2 that I came up with are the worst books of all time are 50 Shades of Grey and Twilight.
Well, considering that I haven't read them and haven't touched some of the barge pole, then I will probably agree with that.
Would you like my angry synopsises of both of those 2 books?
Go on.
Okay, so
as a tangent, as Mark's tangent corner.
I do like a tangent, but 50 Shades of Grey is a book about a man who repeatedly sexually abuses a woman, and she likes it. It is a hideous transgression and complete and utter travesty when it comes to the S&M community. Awful book. And Twilight, I'll give you an example of why Twilight is so bad. If you were a 15-year-old girl and you found out that for 6 months a man who was 4, maybe 5 times your age had been sat watching you while you slept, would you go, how romantic? Or would you go, fuck off, I'm calling the police, you're a stalker?
Okay.
Which one do you think the heroine did?
From the way you've worded it, I would say the former.
Yes, and this is what young women, you're like teenage girls, are being influenced by, and it's not good.
I really like your newborn daughter. I'm going to marry her in 18 years.
Oh yes.
Which is something that happens in the book as well.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
Oh yes. Yes, it does. Anyway, what's the worst book of all time, boys?
Oh, right. Well.
And why is it Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey?
Well, as I say, I haven't read or seen or even done that. See, the thing is, I don't tend to read fiction, so I'm just looking at my bookcase now. I've got things like Into Tibet, the CIA's first Russian Afghanistan spy, which is a true story. Or I've got
that sounds all right.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. Those are the type of books I can tend to read. I tend to read more actual story. Do you know what? I've just found. Hang on. The complete illustrated movie companion to Twilight.
Ugh.
It's in my case.
Ugh.
Oh, sorry. So I'm going to go with the complete illustrated movie companion to Twilight. That's what I'm going for.
That does sound like a strong candidate. Matt?
See, that's going to be a really tough question because fan fiction exists.
Oh.
And with technology is now, people can self-publish ebooks on Amazon. So,
Right.
And I've not really read anything I've inherently hated. So I think it's a really tough question to even say what's the worst book of all time, because guaranteed there's something even worse.
Because I've got things on my shelf like Kenny Dalglish's autobiography and U2 biography. I've got things like Robbie Fowler's biography. Yeah, I've got my what's it called? Michael J. Fox's. I tend to read stuff like that. I don't really read fiction in that way. I've got a couple of Dan Brown books because that must have been at the time. I must have been interested in Dan Brown when that film. Well, not the film. His books became popular, and I think if I reread them, I'd find major problems with them.
I think because I used to work in a library, I would try and read things that were popular at that period in time. So I've read Dan Brown, I've read Twilight, I've read 50 Shades of Grey, but there wouldn't have been choices that I would have gone to by myself,
Yeah.
you know? So maybe I am being unfair asking you for that, because I have a unique experience.
I've also got one which might come in handy with which was really good. Derren Brown's Tricks of the Mind. That's really an
That's a
interesting
great
read.
book. I enjoyed that immensely.
So yeah, so I can't answer that question purely because I tend to read those type of books rather than fiction books.
Let's just
I'm
say
afraid.
it's Twilight and 50 Shades then.
We'll go with that, unless Matt's got another candidate, fan fiction or whatever. So.
I can't think of any, unfortunately.
Any Mulder and Scully fan fiction, which what's the word? Oh my God, what's the bloody called now?
Are you talking about shippers?
Yeah, shipper. Any Mulder and Scully shipper story, fan story. I'll go with. Even though I've not read any.
I can't say that's something I would ever prioritise in my reading list.
All right, okay. So shall we go back to where we were?
Are there any shipper fiction for Red Dwarf?
Guaranteed.
Oh, can we read some shipper fiction for Red Dwarf?
Matt, could that be your homework? We've given homework to people. Could that be your homework to find us some?
The answer is yes, Matthew.
Do I have to?
Yeah.
I suppose.
Come back next season. You don't have to read them. You just have to tell us what they're about.
Okay, I'm going to make sure you regret asking me.
Okay, that sounds like a promise. Okay, right. So we're in the bunk. We're talking to Rimmer. He turns off the TV. Obviously, Rimmer, Lister's trying to watch it. We've talked about that. And we found another little inclination to Rimmer's character, the fact that Lister thought that the officers' quarters was decontaminated. It's on Rimmer's list to do, but he hasn't got round to it. It's on, and then he kind of kerfuffles his way through, saying, well, it's on Wednesday's list. It's on Wednesday's list. Now, it's a great way of getting into the fact that Lister has been contaminated, but it also speaks to Rimmer's character, really, doesn't it, Matt? And what do you think to that way of bringing that into the show?
I think it works as well. I think it works quite well because you're basically having to establish the plot through exposition and dialogue, and it pretty much works that way. And it does have like Rimmer's kind of like anal obsession with doing duties, and again, it could be the fact that he's either doing everything, but then probably not doing it well, or just is either has got lists, but just either doing the easy ones or not. So
that's a good question, that, actually. Does he do everything and does it badly, or does he... Because I don't think he avoids work, does he? Really?
No, because I'm pretty sure he's very anal about the fact that stuff has to be done.
You just can't physically do it.
Yeah.
I think everybody's had that to-do list where they just can't get over the hump of it, and people... You can work really, really hard and get fuck all done. And I think that's what they're saying about Rimmer here, is that it's not about the fact that he's lazy, it's about the fact that he's incompetent.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, that, because it's something that I've thought about but not really formulated in my mind that he does that. And it's interesting that you say, Mark, actually, about the fact that not getting things done, and especially with Lister being interrupted all the time, because that is effectively what... Not nowadays, because there's no one physically in my building when I'm at work. But normally, in a normal everyday situation at work, that I'm in such a role that any problems tend to come to me. And, there's about 90 people in the building at any one time. So I literally walk through the front door intending on doing something of my job. And the minute I walk in, someone comes over to me and goes, "Oh, Kurt, do such and such, or, I've got this problem. Can you help me with this?" And that is my day through the years has been like that. It's been literally one thing after another, and it's like an amalgamation of the two here. Because for me, the way that my job works is that I have every desire to do the job I'm meant to do, and then people will ask me, literally newcomers to the be a director or whatever, will come and say, "What is your role?" And I say, "I can't tell you, because I walk in the building and I just don't know what I'm going to get. but I have like a list of things that I need to do and never get round to them because there's always something else happening. And but I am competent. I'm not incompetent, so, which I'll just put that out there. But yeah, so there's a couple of things here as well. There's the first ever mention of Yvonne Magruder as well, which was nice to see. And they start having this conversation about love being designed by bank managers. What did it take to that then, Mark?
Well, I think this is the first time in 5 episodes that something hasn't aged well and kind of hit me in the woke the woke early 10s left wing right on hippie homo. I didn't like how it was implied that it was a bit rapey, the whole Yvonne Magruder thing. She was concussed when he had sex with her, and that's the first thing that I think I would describe as 80s ick that I've seen in the entire run of Red Dwarf so far. It was only a small thing, but I've been so positive that I noticed something I felt like I did need to be negative about.
Yeah, so what do you... Because there's a couple of bits within this. There's the... I don't know if it's this episode or the next one where he does the punching sign as well. He says, I'll give her one kind of thing as well. And it also brings up the next... It's played for laughs, obviously, but the when Kat goes in and SEX, I want to get it. XEX, I think I found it. Which as a laugh is quite funny. And I don't know if you noticed. Did you notice anything with that scene before I go any further with that?
No.
Right. Okay.
I don't think it was particularly heavy. I don't think it was the kind of thing where people might have to put a warning at the start of the episode. But it did kind of get the hairs on the back of my neck.
Well, that SEX, I want to get it. SEX, I want to found it. Well, Lister's on the floor, isn't he?
Yes.
But if you look at, rather than gazing your eyes upon Cat, Mark, have a look down at Lister, because he smiles when he comes in and says, I think I found it.
Does he?
Yeah. It's brilliant. He's like sitting there lying down because he obviously goes off, he gets the fever, he's got a fever, he has to go. He says, I need to go. And you see him and he basically goes, SEX, I think I found it. And then you just see Craig Charles just like pull this smile, and he can't remove the smile from his face either. He kind of just lays there and just keeps that smile on.
Was this the first Smeg up?
It probably wasn't. It's interesting though. As I say, I would strongly, I know I mentioned this again because I've only started watching them, but the Red Dwarf quarantine discussions that they have on YouTube, just search Red Dwarf quarantine. That a lot of it is technical, which I quite like. I quite like Ed Bye's discussion on technical stuff, and I'll probably get more into that in the second one. But there is like things where Ed Bye is saying, "Oh, we shouldn't have done that," or "We should have edited this out," or you can see right at the end where Liz is just about to smile and things like that. So he's pointing out stuff that they, if they had the time and the money, they would have changed, and it's interesting from that point of view.
I think it's remarkable the way that what they did achieve with regards to the tiny budget they had. And for them to nitpick their own work I get it, it's funny, but there's no need. They really did achieve something special with a shoestring budget.
I mean, you'll see from the demeanour that they are. He is nitpicking it with love. He's not like saying, "Oh, we should have done this, we should have done that." He's more
right.
Like, if you look at this and watch, if you watch here, and I'll talk a little bit more about in Me Too, so we'll park that. But there's certain elements. He says, "Well, on that 2-shot there, if you just see that corner, they would have done this." Or right after this scene, this happened. So they're not doing it as like a nitpicking guide. It's more like discussion and Ed going, fuck. you know what I mean? Why didn't I notice that before? We've spent like the last 30 years watching this TV show, and then they suddenly realise, or someone on the chat mentions it and go, we've not seen that in 30 years. We finally found it now, sort of thing, which I quite like. There's so we talked about the SEX. I want to get it. SEX. I think I found it, and then we get to a fantastic scene. Which is one that I remember vividly.
Before we do, I do need to mention that the scene with the cat, the first scene with the cat, is where I get my Mark's quote of the week in this particular episode. Okay, As he comes out and he's walking around, he goes, "That's mine, this is mine." And if I go to a buffet, in my head, I will be like, "That's mine, this is mine." And I do it all the time. And consistently 5 episodes in a row, there has been something that the cat has said that I still do and say 30 years on.
Oh, it's brilliant, isn't it? Matt, have you found that? This is something that's more of an office exam thing, but have you find yourself quoting Red Dwarf on occasion in the high street or, just elsewhere within your normal life?
In places, yeah. I mean, like, it's like, man, the amount of times I probably said Smeg to myself, like, oh, Smeg hell. Which is probably the big one.
Yeah.
Can't think of anything top of my head under pressure, but it might just be so ingrained in my subconscious that I haven't noticed. But I do think that's the scene that kind of encapsulates the cat as a character, though, with the whole "this is mine, this is mine, that's mine." Apart from that, I don't want that. That encapsulates the cat's character for me when you want to describe it. But perhaps sometimes I've done that to myself, going, "That's mine, this is mine," except that I don't want that bit. But other than that, I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Well, I deliberately quote those words exactly and clock whether or not the person I'm with spots it. Because I'm a massive nerd. But what I've been saying on previous episodes, that one is quite deliberate when I do that. But there are certain phraseologies and terms that I just repeatedly use from both Red Dwarf and Buffy the Vampire Slayer that have just become the way I talk, my vocabulary, my phraseology. And it's fascinating that it really does seem to be just those 2 programs.
Actually, saying that, there's probably a lot more on Buffy that I probably use than Red Dwarf, if I'm honest. Because Buffy's probably like the biggest impacted show I've ever had on me. But
we're not doing a Buffy podcast.
Oh, there's too many anyway.
Yeah, I actually did think before we come in, I thought Mark's talked a lot about Buffy. Matt likes Buffy. I'm going to find there's going to be a Buffy podcast.
Not doing a Buffy podcast.
No.
There's I know we've got 12 seasons of Red Dwarf, but there are only 6 episodes. Buffy's slightly longer. Right, okay, so let's talk about I'm Going to Eat You Little Chickie. I think, Mark, you need to talk about this scene to begin with, and we'll let Matt jump in because, Cat is your favourite character. It is a play already on the I'm Going to Eat You Little Fishy, but the chicken is just absolutely probably one of my favourite moments of Cat so far, really. It's
just... You can imagine an actual cat playing with a I don't know, a mouse or a little bird or something. It seems like Danny John Jules has really got the concept of the character, and he's been sublime throughout the entire series. He's not given much depth, but what he's given, he just does so well.
He does. What do you think to Cat then, Matt? Especially the first few episodes because he is played as a kitty, and as a kitten in some ways, isn't he? Or a developing cat or whatever. But what do you think to the cat up until this point?
The cat's got some really funny moments as a character overall. The only issue I have is there's a couple of issues I've always had with the cat. One is that he's extremely underused in terms of the whole ensemble, particularly as it develops. And two, I've always held, particularly with a lot of earlier episodes, that if the cat wasn't there, it wouldn't affect the episode, apart from losing a few funny scenes. Yeah, but in isolation so far, he's a very funny character and kind of helps. I think it's like as a consequence of what happens with Frankenstein anyway, and he kind of is kind of like symbol of the idea that 3 million years have passed. But in terms of the character on a logistical plot level, doesn't really do much for the show in terms of plot device. Just there. Sometimes it feels like he's there just to add a funny moment in to kind of pad out the plot. But then again, though, he's funny.
I think that's exactly what he's there for, but I don't have a problem with it. I think the he's very much a simple character for simple laughs, but it's done with such grace and style that it's not crude.
Yeah, I always think he gets the short end of the stick whenever there's anything in terms of like development and everything. And,
that's probably fair.
I mean, we've had the episode Waiting for God, but that wasn't really about him. It was a story about the cat species, wasn't it? Where it's not really. And I think we've just briefly discussed this in previous episodes that his in some ways it works because of the nature of cats in the first place, that they just do appear when they want to appear. So I get it on that level, but it would be nice to see a bit more. But the levity that it causes, and it does throw it up. I think the episodes do by throwing these little sections in. I mean, there is elements with it, where we get things like where Cat finds Lister and stuff like that, and I think Rimmer, by extension, the Scutters is designed to. I mean, we'll go into the next scene in a second. Are designed to be the hands and the things that can help with Rimmer, because Rimmer can't touch anything at this moment in time. And I think, it's interesting the change that especially in this scene where he's playing with the chicken, that it's very cat-like. And then once we get to Rimmer comes in and actually has concern for Lister, and the way that Cat is so vain that he just like sort of steps, he goes okay, and he stands back up and sits back down again. But it adds that little change in levity, a bit more like what's the word? Just a different type of comedy, and it just like livens the show up a little bit and doesn't like get dredged into the story so much. But I do think he's underused.
See, I don't think he is underused. I think if he was used too much, at this point at least, when he's a relatively shallow character, it is a man playing a cat, essentially. I think if he was used more in these first series, it would have over-egged it. And I think he does get a very slow character development throughout the first 6 series, where he becomes more human as the series progress. I think if there'd have been too much cat, it would have been a show about a cat. And a cat is a supporting character in any story, really. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Right. Okay. So let's move on from that. So what did you what as a comedy sketch then, with Rimmer coming in and saying, "Lister's on the floor. He's on the floor. Help him, kind of thing." And Cat jumps up and then sits back down again. What did you make to that, Mark?
Oh, I howled with laughter. It's just my kind of humour, where I've got nothing other than that. I found it really fucking funny. I'm sorry. I'm still laughing now.
No, so as I was saying before, the next scene where Lister's actually in the medibay and the Scutters are trying to take his temperature, it is a funny joke, but it's also an extension of Rimmer, because Rimmer can't touch anything. That he's using the Scutters at this point, and the Scutters have become kind of a staple of the show in a lot of ways. But it's interesting in this scene, which is obviously the main crux of the episode moving forward, that we've got he's gone to Kachansky's quarters to wallow, is what Rimmer says, and the fact that he's got this pneumonia, but because it's mutated over the 3 million years, it's changed. He mentions confidence and paranoia, and they also mention the red herring and the mayor of Warsaw, which was something that I wanted to bring up on the Red Dwarf quarantine thing. Was Rob Grant says that he thought that he got that from somewhere, but whenever you Google it, it comes up saying Red Dwarf put this as a thing in. So I think there's a bit of a circular logic there, where Rob Grant either made it up and has forgotten he's made it up, or that it was a real thing that Rob Grant actually made, put it into the show, and that it's now cycled through, that it's become a reality.
On that kind of vein, are any of you familiar with either Jenny Murrell or the World of Crap website?
No.
Jenny Murrell, I think she was a writer for Den of Geek, and she got kind of comedy writer. She has like a blog called World of Crap, and a lot of it is kind of like going through old annuals and stuff. And she's wrote a lot, kind of like analysing old episodes of Rainbow.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, and like, but in like a very kind of like, oh look at Bumblebee being a serial killer, that kind of level, and it's
Right.
very very funny. I think she actually released a book, I think, on an Amazon ebook as well, which is also quite funny. But I do remember a tweet saying that whenever now she tries to Google stuff on Rainbow, a lot of the stuff that comes back is stuff that she's written. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah, so that could well be true. It could be, yeah. But it's just interesting that I looked at it and was quite willing to be prepared to say, it's just something that Red Dwarf have put together and just used, because Warsaw didn't have their mayors. They had something else and whatever. But the fact that then Rob Grant says, I'm sure I heard it somewhere that it was the case, but when I've searched for it, all that comes up is Red Dwarf. Is that's interesting. But yeah, that's a good analogy. That's really interesting.
Say that. I've just googled mayor of Warsaw, and it is there is a current mayor even.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not gonna insult the Polish by even attempting to butcher the pronunciation, but yeah, the mayor of Warsaw is mayor of Warsaw is an actual thing apparently.
The mayor of Warsaw. Does Warsaw get a mayor? Is it civilized enough?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
I'm sorry, it was a cheap gag. I couldn't resist.
Well, not blood related, kind of extended family related to a previous mayor of Warsaw, I think.
Cool.
Like my mom's cousin, like my second cousin's father-in-law, I think was mayor of Warsaw at one point.
Right.
So facts about
Latham. That's enough, Latham. Thanks very much for that. But we've got there's a couple of bits within this as well. The fact that this confidence and paranoia, we'll bring it up here, because this goes back to the fact that there's no aliens in Red Dwarf kind of thing. That the confidence paranoia is very much in similar kind of storytelling as like the devil and the angel on each shoulder kind. That kind of storytelling. It's interesting that they use the words confidence and paranoia. I think personally, I think that it's interesting that they kind of go the psychological route with this, and especially with the show being quite psychological overall as well. But this is an interesting development, and the fact that they use this the pneumonia that's been mutated. And the people that come up, confidence and paranoia, that's been born within the show, so they can bring in characters like that purely because it's within the framework of the show is really interesting in itself. But what did you make to the confidence and paranoia characters, Matt? Before we actually get to see them, but this is the first mention of them and the fact that they are born out of this disease.
They are pretty much like extensions of Lister as a character, so I think you're kind of exploring Lister anyway, and it is quite interesting when you think of them as separate characters, because you've got the kind of like confident aspect of Lister, because he's never really seen himself as a slob. His physical appearance has never, his self-image has never been low enough for him to kind of like question how he looks, because he's always been quite confident in what he's been at. I think a lot of his like paranoia example comes, I think, from his romanticized aspect of himself. So, and it's a lot more of his internal stuff. So it's a bit more of how he deals with people. I think that how he deals or interacts with people that comes from his paranoia, rather than his outwardly physical stuff. Because I'm pretty sure there's always been occasions where like everyone tries to comment on how slobbish he is, but he just doesn't see it.
Mm.
Yeah, and it's just stripped off his back. But it's always been whenever I think anyone challenges his personality or his viewpoints, that's when he gets kind of paranoid about stuff. So yeah, and I think I think it's quite nice that gets established a bit here as well. So and elements of, and like kind of like the more superficial elements of his character are the ones that get boosted by his confidence, like his musical skills and his like physical appearance, whereas a lot of where the paranoia kind of gets underneath his subconscious thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's really well done. I agree. And I'm glad that they went with confidence and paranoia rather than angel and devil, because because the secular element of it makes it a lot more science fiction-y in my head, and really gets deep into the speculative side of science fiction. And for me, a mutated virus, when I was watching this in the middle of COVID-19 lockdown, that was a bit of a slap round the face. And I don't want I certainly don't want my confidence and paranoia turning up. I think my paranoia would be, well, I don't think I'd like him very much. Although saying that, I don't think I'd like my confidence either. I think my confidence would irritate me very, very quickly.
It's interesting to say that, because I myself have, I'm working in this in this world that we're living in the moment with COVID, and I'm quite a pragmatic, as I mentioned before. I'm quite a pragmatic person, but there is an air of confidence in the fact that I'm going to work, and I don't really feel the I don't feel like I'm being agitated to go to work. I don't like wake up in the morning and go, oh, I've got to go to work now. I don't have that feeling. But and I go to work and I do get on with my work, and I have to deal with people. I have to it's been interesting and a learning curve for me, because you've got things like dealing with different characters and different people reacting in different ways, and there's a lot of psychological, and I think this is coming back up to what we're saying with this episode. A lot of psychological elements that you have to deal with. So I've had to deal with people who are really concerned and really quite scared, but they're also worried and things like that. So my confidence, I would say, is quite high. I'm able to go to work. I don't really have any major concerns. I do things in a pragmatic way, in a risk assessed way, because that's another element of my work. But yesterday I went into the city and to get some prescriptions for Mum, because she's being shielded, so she has to stay at home. So I went into town, and I did not like it whatsoever, and I did get quite paranoid because it was something that I'm not used to. I've been going to and from work since this has all happened, so I'm used to that. I'm used to just going, well, my job has never changed. Well, my job has changed, but my routine hasn't. I still go to work in the morning or a night shift or during or middle shift. I still deal with things when I'm at work. Yes, my role has changed. I've become a manager of an area which isn't my area, but it's still the same routine. The minute I went into the city, I got a little bit more paranoid, because it was like, oh, I haven't been here since this all kicked off, and it affected me more than I thought it would. So that, in a psychological aspect, really is interesting, because you look at what's happening here with his confidence and paranoia. But it's obviously ramped up because of the way that storytelling works. Is an interesting concept, and especially in this day and age that we're living in now. Yeah,
and I think you've hit it on the head. You mentioned you don't really have faith. I certainly don't have faith. I think confidence and paranoia are universally secular, understandable elements of everybody's psyche. So regardless of whether you have faith, you have no faith, whatever type of faith you have, whatever kind of person you have, you will have elements of your own personality that you're confident in and elements of your own personality that you're paranoid about. So I think by making it more inclusive than an angel and a devil, it was not only a perceptive way of them to deal with that kind of idea, but it was also very, very sci-fi. Again, going back to the idea that maybe in 30,000 years' time or whatever, there isn't any need to make it specific about religious elements of people's lives.
Yeah, it is really interesting.
It's nicely done, is what I'm getting at, and making it secular makes it inclusive.
And I mean, jumping ahead. But then again, if you're listening to this, you would have seen the episode anyway, or you're not going to be devoid of spoilers. I mean, because technically, the confidence which you'd probably have as the angel on the shoulder, technically he's the villain of the episode. So, and you probably couldn't have that if it was angel and the devil. It would be the devil that would be the villain of it. So there's like a interesting parallel in terms of how you see confidence in your paranoia, and that's someone who's too confident can probably get themselves into a bit of trouble. And you do kind of see that in later series, like for example with the polymorph episode. like with the negative aspects of Lister becomes a kind of gung ho action hero.
Yeah.
Whilst it probably wasn't foreshadowing in the slightest, there's at least like the establishment that if Lister didn't have that level of paranoia or those aspects to him, then I think a lot of his kind of like self-preservation would have been gone as well. And I think then like the fact, I don't think it gets too deep. I don't think it gets delved that much in here. Then like I think in the back of his head, he is like the last hope of humanity as well. So so I think the paranoia aspect kind of helps protect his self-preservation. Whereas if he was following the confidence, as you'll see later on, then he's basically buggering the human race.
Absolutely, and I think that there's an element of too much paranoia is a bad thing, but also too much confidence is a bad thing. There's a real message in this episode, and the reality is we balance our confidence and paranoia because that's what being human is. This is really quite deep stuff, but in my head, until I saw this, I would have assumed that your confidence, your paranoia, looked like a very hot version of yourself and an ugly version of yourself. And I wondered why they went with these two different actors rather than Craig Charles playing himself. But I actually think I prefer this. What do you think? Do you think it would have worked better, or do you think it wouldn't have worked as well if they'd have had two Craig Charleses doing this?
I suppose they do that later on, don't they? To a degree, with, as you say, with the likes of the polymorph one, where
and the Inquisitor is themselves as well.
Yeah, Inquisitor and things. They do deal with that. I mean, from a logistics point of view, I would have thought that we've got Me Squared coming up, but you'd have to do more split screen and more second runs at episodes and split the filming up and things, and to be able to create like multiple versions of him. But I think it works quite well because the way that they write it is that confidence is the epitome of what he perceives it to be.
Yeah.
So it's like it's his perception of it. Where if it was him perceiving himself as a better person, it could work. But I just think that maybe especially as a on screen, it gives you more of a feeling of what he perceives confidence to be and what he perceives paranoia to be, because especially the way that they're acting it as well. The fact that he's wearing that, the paranoia's wearing that suit and he's shriveled up and he's kind of like sort of laid back and kind of well, look at you kind of thing. Whereas paranoia is very kind of Elvis looking and has that American swagger to him and stuff like that, which I think it works. But it would have worked, I think. But I do think that it probably works better in this era of the show, and this way this works, it probably
I
does
agree.
work better.
And not just for the budgetary reasons. I think it really does make a difference.
Which American late night chat show host would be your confidence?
Oh shit!
Because when he appeared, I'm like, I recognise that guy, and even though I've not watched anything, because I didn't realise it was Craig Ferguson until I had to look it up on Wikipedia. And okay, it's nowhere, probably not as big over here, but he used to be one of the many late night chat show hosts in the US. So he was like up against unless he was like, like he got Jay Leno and the other guy and what's his face and Doohickey.
Wow.
Yeah, but basically what James Corden's doing now, he was doing something similar, and I think he was doing it for like about 14 odd years, I think. So it'd be interesting to see if you showed an American this, they'll probably go in and go, well, wait, what? It'd be like watching Graham Norton suddenly appear on Father Ted, and you'd suddenly forgotten he was an actor. The
one I probably most kind of lean towards is probably someone like Jimmy Kimmel, but it is that Craig Ferguson thing as well. I only realised that myself yesterday, and I was like, oh yeah, is I. Which I thought was interesting. But they directly mention that in the episode as well, don't they? As much as like that's what he perceives him to be, as American quiz show host. So it's interesting how they kind of use that as the kind of the confidence as such. There's a couple of bits that I've missed out, which I just wanted to just briefly touch upon. That would be the raining fish and the Warsaw combustion, both of which are ways of telling the story that things are coming real, and Rimmer's then hallucination little story where he's telling him about the you had a fever, hallucinations, they were solid, they were real, they were alive, they were solid. And it's I'll try and put it another way. You had an hallucination, and they were solid. Which I think I love that scene, and I just think that it's fantastic. And also with I know we're talking about Cat briefly, but the levity as well of the fact that Cat's coming in to bring the eaten grapes and the orange peels, all of which have been eaten or been used, which I thought was interesting. And obviously the actual red herrings or the fish, the trout that are on the floor, that some of them are actually alive, which I thought was an interesting choice on the part of the producers.
Yeah, that was my second 80s ick. That's clearly animal cruelty.
Mm. Yeah, they put them back in. Apparently, they put the ones that actually were moving around. They put them back into water. Apparently.
Okay, I'm good, but still, it's a bit icky.
Yeah, they do bring that up as well. So it's but yeah, I can see it's played for laughs, but I can see that's a potential way of looking at it, definitely.
But in the entire series one, there was only this episode where I spotted any 80s ick, so not too bad. I watch a lot of older stuff, and sometimes I wish I wasn't so woke, because it does ruin my enjoyment of stuff when things that I used to be very fond of have something in that that's now problematic.
Yeah, I can see that. That's the one thing about like going through things critically. As much as you find deeper stuff, that you will find other things, and it comes with the territory. But I think that you've got to take it in the context in which it was made, and it was a different time back then.
If you can
go on.
If you like cats, don't watch anything from Disney before about 1990 with any fucking cats in. Thank you, Tim from Without a Mouse, for that shit.
Oh yeah, I remember listening to that. Yes.
Oh man, okay. But yes, that is we made them out.
We made mice.
We made mice.
It's the cat.
That's another we made mice production. So okay, so let's just talk briefly about the introduction of Lister's guitar playing and songwriting, because this is the first time that we see him singing a song as well, and I think it's the perfect episode to bring that in. We've seen his guitar, I think, in previous episodes, but this is the first time we hear him physically singing and writing a song. Matt, what do you make, Matt, to the way that they use this? I mean, you can talk about through the series as well, but this is the first time that we see just how prevalent and how good he is a songwriter. What do you make to it?
I think this is highlights the thing I was on about before in terms of the majority of his external, or the way he portrays himself, he's got quite a high opinion of.
Yeah. Whereas
a lot of his internalized stuff is what he's more paranoid about. I think it clicks well with his hygiene in that he's kind of got a blind spot.
Yeah.
So I think it's nice that he's got so it kind of shows that he's not very creative as well. And when you think about it, like, again, last human on Earth, who's going to generate the art and creativity that we see? Unfortunately, it's this guy.
Yeah.
Art
is going to dwindle, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, definitely.
And the one question that I wanted to bring up actually is we're talking very much about it's very much a Lister story. So I get why they did this, but Paranoia doesn't get the screen time that Confidence does, and I can see why. But Mark, what do you make to the fact of that? Because Paranoia literally gets only a couple of scenes. Yet it gets a bit of a scene with Rimmer, and it's a reflection of Rimmer in some ways more than he is Lister in certain points. Because Rimmer says about look at him, he's talking to a piece of his own imagination, and then Rimmer realizes that he's talking to Paranoia. So what do you make to that?
I think it's really innovative. It gives us an insight into the character of Lister. He spends more time with his Confidence because he's a confident person. I think it's clever.
Would you have liked to see Paranoia spend a bit of time with Rimmer, though? Or do you think it was just enough to deal with the way it was? Would it have confused things?
I think potentially it was probably that there's quite a lot goes on in this episode. I think they might have initially wanted there to have been more Confidence and Rimmer interacting, but they had to cut somewhere, maybe. I think that it felt like the intention was that, Confidence was going to hang out with Lister and Paranoia was going to hang out with Rimmer. So maybe that was what they had to cut, I don't know. But I don't think I think it benefits more from Confidence being a stronger part, because it gives us an insight into Lister, and it also gives us a moral message that, yes, confidence is good, but if you go too far, you're going to screw yourself over.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I think that, as I say, Confidence naturally is a more lively character. It's not as self-deprecating as Paranoia would be. But having said that, the fact that, like you say, that Lister naturally would err towards more of the Confidence side. You can see why it was angled at that point. So I really like that. But even though we don't get much with Paranoia, we do get the stabbing scene. The fact that the Scutters are basically Rimmer's, mercenaries as such. What did you make to that, Matt, with the stabbing scene?
Before then, something just popped up in my head that I was going to briefly mention. It does involve a slightly future episode in terms of Confidence and Paranoia, and again how it relates to Rimmer. Because it's the first appearance, I think it's the first or second appearance of Ace. I can't remember which episode it is. It might be Dimension Jump, but there's a bit where Ace Rimmer talks about the choice that, or what happened, or the path that Rimmer took, which sent him to what we know with Ace, and that's when he got held back a year.
Yeah, that's Dimension Jump. Yeah,
and that was the moment that made Ace Rimmer. And I think a lot of that might be because of the paranoia. It might be the paranoia, all those negative aspects, or that self-questioning, which I think Ace Rimmer eventually would embrace and make him and push himself. Whereas we all know what happened the other side. And I think as you were just talking about the Confidence and Paranoia stuff, I think, and I was trying to see how. I mean, there's not much in terms of how much. There's not much in terms of Rimmer being explored here, but I find it quite interesting that those seeds can be argued, get explored with Rimmer in a completely different way later on in the series, in terms of the confidence side of Rimmer was actually probably based because the paranoia side of him was probably amplified when he was in school and held back a year. And I'm not. It was only until yourself and Mark was talking about the confidence and paranoia stuff that cropped into my head, and I thought, oh, okay, so there's a interesting moral. It's not like black and white. It's more a different kind of way and stuff, and they kind of not in the same way, but they kind of touch upon that with Rimmer later on. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that because both Mark and I decided that we were going to do this podcast on a whim. And
yeah, we did.
But what I'm finding is that, and I think that hopefully, fingers crossed, that when the listeners do get to listen to this and to listen to our view of it, because I think that we're naturally taking a look at this, not necessarily scene by scene, joke by joke. Or wasn't that a funny joke? But we're looking into the deeper context of what it means and the human side of things as well, which doesn't surprise me, to be fair, Mark. To be absolutely honest with you, but the fact that we are looking into this in this kind of depth, and just generally talking about what this brings up in both us and what it brings up in the show and the characterization of the show, and that it isn't just a sci-fi sitcom. There's a lot more to it, and by you saying stuff like that, well, never, just what's popped into my head, I'm hoping that kind of resonates with other people as well, that they'll get involved and they'll see things, and hopefully we can build something with regards to this. I mean, we've got a long way to go. We're only at the end of season 1, and already we can see this formulating. I think that really works to showcase how good this show is, and I think it works really well. The only thing that I would like to touch upon with that stabbing scene, I thought was and then totally going off that and going, no, that stabbing scene, that's funny. It is just the comic genius of the Scutters when it drops the actual syringe. Because I don't know if you noticed that he's going, stab him, stab him, stab him. And then Paranoia turns around and the actual syringe falls out of the actual Scutter's hand, which I thought was really, really good. So... And he also talks about the snogging his own hand and stuff like that, which I'm sure that most people probably would have done at some point.
Don't know what you're talking about.
I will not say. I will not ask that question. But they do confidence actually, and this lines up as I say, with this episode being what they thought was going to be a cliffhanger for season 2. They talk about this bringing Kachansky back without turning Rimmer off. They've found a way that they would reduce power in certain areas and Paranoia starts talking about why we should be interested in you. Confidence retorts back saying charming young stud and all that. And it's interesting how we were talking to Carl a couple of episodes ago about how Lister's a really clever guy, and through his confidence, he actually works out where the discs are being held. But at the same time, you've got Paranoia talking about Kachansky and why would she be interested in someone like you? And I think this is the crux of the episode right here, because it's talking about, what his ultimate goal and what he wants to happen, but also how confidence and Paranoia play into that. I don't know what you thought made of that, Matt.
Again, I think it does highlight, as much as confidence is inevitably the villain of this piece, it does kind of highlight the positive aspects of Dave and Howie, and perhaps why, as a main character and the heroic one, so to speak, it highlights I think it's the show trying to highlight that there are elements that when they get into the more sci-fi territory, that Dave can believably be a kind of hero, or an intelligence enough to be someone rather than just a bum. So I think a lot of it is. I think some aspects of it is him not realizing what he's got in himself. And I'm like, there's a scene in Back to Earth where I think some kids tell him that he's incredibly brave, and I don't think he realizes that at this point. But he has moments of it. So he has moments of intelligence, bravery,
humility.
Humility. Yeah, he's got humility. He's got empathy as well. But I don't think he lacks the kind of drive to propel himself to chase or capitalise on those elements. Whereas on the flip side with Rimmer, you've got I think you got the inverse, where he's got the drive, but he lacks empathy, heroism, and I think Dave is kind of convincing himself that, hang on, he's got elements of himself, or he's got of his personality that could be attractive. Again, that's him kind of coming to terms with some of his stuff internally that he probably had issues with earlier. So we're starting to see a lot more of his positive aspects that he didn't realise he had. And but then again, that was probably because he had to confront that paranoia and not be blindsided by the overconfidence.
Well, I think it's early in the season as well, because early in the show's run that he's been in stasis for 3 million years, so he's gone from a full 169 at time of counting, but we won't go into that. 169 people. He's 169th on the ship. Only rats are better than worse than him. That he's come from a ship full of people. He's come out of stasis. He's having to deal with the new concept of what his life actually is. He's the only human alive left. He's having to deal with all those issues, and it's no thing that we get to episode 5 and he's having to deal with this existential crisis in such a way that he's not sure where he wants to go and what he wants his aspirations to be a certain thing, but has he really thought it through? Is because having Holly's made that decision, as we've mentioned before, that that Rimmer's probably the best suited, and what you're saying, Matt, is the fact that the dichotomy between the two of them and the juxtaposition between the two, because they're so far apart, the polar opposites apart, that they both will draw each other together. Not necessarily. They get drawn together pretty much in season 7, in a particular Rimmer dream, but won't talk about that just in a Lister dream, but won't talk about that just now. But they get pulled together from an emotional and and a character perspective. But we're dealing here with like Lister's reaction to all the stuff that's gone on before, and I think that as a show, I mean, it doesn't put that on screen as something that's on the nose or direct to you. It layers it in. I think that really works. I don't know what you think, Mark, to that.
Pretty much agree with everything you said. I haven't really got anything to add on that. Sorry.
Okay, no, it's all right. It's all right. I feel confident. Great.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah, Kurt, baby. Yeah, you're doing well.
Thank you. I'm going to go outside now. But so they smash up he smashes up the Medicom, and Rimmer is trying to tell him you're still sick, and shows a bit of empathy. It does actually show a little bit of empathy, and that's something that we haven't seen of Rimmer actually thinking about it in the mess hall, if you want to call it that. Rimmer runs out to Kat and says, he's hurt, you need to come and help. And in here, he's saying, you're still sick, you need to stop this, you're still sick. So there's a bit of empathy there as well, I think, Matt. I think that there is elements that are being brought in. I know it's very small, but there is those elements that
it's
Rimmer's
the brother
using.
Relationship, isn't it? I think I talked about this on a previous episode. I used to thump my brother, but woe betide anyone who thumped my brother, So they've very much established that they have a brotherly relationship, and I think this is that coming out.
Yeah. I wonder how much of it as well is perhaps Rimmer thinking that he's given the job of making sure that the last human alive is sane and alive. I wonder how much of that is part of that as well, because I'm wondering whether he's got
point.
That kind of... I wonder how much of that he's taken as responsibility as well. So he must have realised that he came back, that Holly picked him for a reason, and he must be the only person who probably can tolerate, to a point, Lister, or is comfortable enough to be around him, even though he does comment on his slobbishness.
It's a very good point.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Huh.
Mind blown twice in one episode. Matt, you can come back. Okay, so I think we need to talk about the external scene. It was done on a gantry. And I actually think, on the two times I've watched it recently, that they actually do a really, really good job of portraying something on a scale. There's a lot of trickery done with this, but I actually really think that that's fantastic.
Yeah.
The kind of washing machine tubes in the space helmet may not be quite the same thing.
Here's the thing. That gantry is excellent. However, the medical rig and the sprayed moon boots and washing machine tubes in the spacesuit are not. And they're very, very incongruous with each other. I thought that they did so well in one element, but it was kind of shat on by the other elements where it was just tosh.
It was great though. I love it. I think it's brilliant. That you can have both in the same kind of scenes.
It's very British sitcom, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like 40 Towers, moving walls kind of thing, isn't it? But yeah, I think it's great personally. But it is interesting on Confidence's demise here. He's the one that killed Paranoia. He put him in the waste garbage and shot him out into space. And Confidence's overconfidence. Now, what did you make to that?
I think it's about right, isn't it? That if you have confidence before a fall, but your confidence gets rid of your paranoia. It's a lovely little metaphor, really.
Matt, what did you make?
Again, it's the self-preservation principle in that, like, without that fear, without that, oh, hang on, if I do this, will my head explode because there's no oxygen? That, if you don't have that, then the self-preservation side of yourself will fail. And I think that's the example here. So if you're too overconfident, it's like, it's only space, or like it's like you come to a Pelican Crossing on a dual carriageway, and there's no cars coming in. Or you're too busy something, and you're like, it's only a quiet road, and you don't walk across, and part of you says, should I just push the button anyway. And you don't. And you don't, and suddenly a massive 10-ton truck comes in and hits you. Then, yeah, it's that element of... there's probably a better metaphor I could probably chose, but yeah, it's that if you're too overconfident about stuff, then you don't see or you don't consider the voice, which adds that element of self-preservation. And again, you kind of see that kick in. You say, oh, hang on, we can't do this because of this. And in this point, it is life or death. And without that element of paranoia, yeah, and if Lister just pretty much gave him confidence, he would have took his helmet off and died.
Yeah, it's a lovely kind of metaphor and allegory to the episode itself, isn't it? Really, I mean, it's dealing with these issues and the fact that that Lister doesn't do that he realizes, no, I can't do that. You're insane, kind of thing. That it's blown up to all proportions, including confidence itself. But the fact that that's kind of the story and the kind of metaphor and the kind of fable that it's trying to tell is interesting. I'm sure that you would have liked Katz doing his laundry.
Oh, I did. And do you know, I did my laundry yesterday, and Nathan wasn't even in the room. The cat wasn't even in the room. But I still, as I was doing my laundry, I went to myself, I'm doing my laundry. And I'm such an idiot. Such a loser. There was no one to even take the piss out of me for being a loser. And I was still a massive loser. And I didn't care because it popped me.
Oh, man. Right, okay. So I think we're at the end of the episode, effectively. We get to the fact that, he's got the box and he's I'm sure that we've all done this in the past as well, in our younger days, where he's going, hey, yo, Chrissy! And, trying to, work out how he's going to introduce himself to her.
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
No idea.
No.
And and obviously the twist, which obviously, as I say, they're different. It was different originally, but what do you make? What do you make, Matt, to the final scene? The fact that he's trying to build his confidence up, that he's amalgamated the two together, and now he's well enough again. His confidence and paranoia is back where it's supposed to be, and he is Dave Lister again. Effectively, he's not being led by anyone. He's been just the two aspects of that have been brought together, and then the turnaround of it being another rumor. What do you make of that?
I think it does showcase that perhaps whilst not as street smart as Lister, Rimmer still has some semblance of intelligence in him, but I think that comes from his own sense of self-preservation and cunning and his own kind of belief in himself. So, again, this is something that will probably end up being discussed a bit more in depth with the next episode, but it's fully in character and fully in character, and I can fully buy about what happens, and totally it makes perfect sense that Rimmer perhaps would have thought about this as well, and I do quite like the fact as well that throughout all of it, the one thing that perhaps Lister didn't consider was that Rimmer might still know him enough to think about this as well. So throughout all the confidence that we've seen, there was that element of paranoia that we had hinted at, where I think paranoia goes, oh, Arnold Rimmer's slightly more intelligent and more driven than I am, and there's an example of that actually happening. So I think that the hurdle of Lister getting to a certain point to kind of switch it on and gets to that point, but then I think he kind of doesn't realise, he perhaps hasn't thought about the fact that his fears about Rimmer being slightly more intelligent than him, or cunning is probably a better word.
Sneaky.
Sneaky, yeah. Again, his own self-preservation, as said, kind of took over, and perfectly in character, and quite a rewarding punchline to the end of the episode, I think.
Yeah, I think if you look at, in some ways, there's two made scenes that will refer back to that, because you've got one, the fact that Rimmer knew that Rimmer must have known and was cunning enough that if Lister did figure it out, and Lister's clever enough to figure it out as well, So there's that, you say, that brotherly interplay as well, Mark, as well, where you get the fact that Lister's managed to work it out with his confidence. He's gone, somewhere you put it under my nose. If you were to, it's a solar panel outside. And then Rimmer's being clever enough to think, well, I'll put it there, but that's not the end of the game. So I do like that interplay.
Yeah, and they don't like each other, but they've already started to respect and understand each other a lot more just 5 episodes in, and that's character development that I never really thought of up until, well, about 5 seconds ago.
But then how long have they known each other before the end? That's the thing I never fully got. There was a strong sense of them. Well, they was forced together anyway because they had to share a bunk. I think they had to share a bunk with each other. But how often were they interacting with each other before the stasis leak?
Well, I think it's interesting because he had all his mates around him, and we've talked again, Matt, about the fact that his mates that he hung around with, that Lister generally hung around with, and that Rimmer was very much like I'm a workman. At the disco, for example, he's still wearing his uniform, and he's still doing his salutes and things, and he was very much jibed at, and it was like on the surface thing. And obviously, I think that in the bunks, you'd probably get a different Lister compared to what it is now because they are forced into that situation. So, but you're right. There will have been some interplay and some conversation between. I just think it might have been the dynamics would have been different.
Mm.
Well, that brings it to the end of the episode. Apart from, obviously, Rimmer comes up, appears second, and says, he did warn you, and now you've got it in stereo, baby, which I thought was a great line. So what we do, Matt, now is we pick out a favourite moment of this episode just to finish off, and then we'll find out what you're up to. So what would you consider to be your favourite moment of the show, or a moment you'd like to pick out from the show itself, the episode?
Probably be the stabbing section. There's a bit where he goes, "Oh yeah," and then I think he's like saying, "Oh yeah, this is his name. We call him Stabbing."
Right, excellent, Mark. What would your you've had your cat moment and your phrase moment as it's become a regular thing now. But what would you pick out as your moment for this episode today?
I'm doing my laundry.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to go with, and it's totally inadvertently, I'm definitely going with the smile of the of a unconscious Rimmer. Unconscious. I keep saying unconscious Rimmer. Unconscious Lister. I definitely suggest that you go back and watch that because it is brilliant. I love it. It's fantastic. So that brings us to the end of the episode. Next week we are going to be talking about Me Squared, which is the series finale, the season finale. So that's going to be fantastic. It feels like only last week that we were talking about the beginning of Red Dwarf. And, and we're here 7 weeks later, and we're at the end of season 1. I want to thank everyone for listening up until this point. So check us out next week where we will be talking about Me Squared. But before we do that, a couple of things. First of all, please stay back and listen to some of the things that's going on in the We Made This Podcast network. There'll be a few clips at the end of this episode. And finally, Matt, where can people find you online, and what are you currently up to?
I do a podcast myself and called Pick a Disc, and it's about people picking a disc and talking about it for whatever reason they want to. And I know the two of you have been on it. I know Kurt's been on it twice, once as a host and once as a guest. In fact, you were my first guest. You were the guinea pig for the format. So yeah, and you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram under Pick a Disc. So yeah, you can find us there.
And Mark, where can people find you online?
My Twitter is @MarkAdamsHC. That is also my Instagram that I don't use because I'm over 40 and not very good with Instagram. I do 4 shows on the We Made This Podcast network. This one. And then I also do Pull or Pass, which is a weekly comic book discussion show at Pull or Pass. I also do Life's Milestones, which is my Celebrant podcast, where I talk about naming ceremonies and weddings and funerals, as well as, general birth, relationships and death conversations. That's at Life's Milestones. And at least while the COVID-19 situation's going on, I do Don't Say the C Word, which is a daily random chat podcast where I talk to a different guest about a different thing every day. That's at Don't Say the C Pod.
Excellent. You can find me at rmuldrake on Twitter, which is RMULDRAKE. I have been on the show running the Millennium podcast, TV show Millennium from 1996 to 1999. It was on air, and that is at The Time Is Now Pod. You can also find me on the Xcast as well occasionally, and that's the X-Files podcast, which is at the X_cast on Twitter. And also Star Trek podcast as well. So I'm on quite a few things. Star Trek, which we're currently showcasing Star Trek Discovery. It's the Make It So podcast. And we've done Star Trek Picard and currently going through Star Trek Discovery at the moment. And you can find that at the Twitter handle at Jean-Luc Podard. But yeah, but until next time, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Matt, for coming on. Thanks for your first episode. You'll be back next week. But until next time...
Elsewhere on We Made This. I'm in a band podcast.
We also had access to a container because our recording studio is on the site of a container business.
And JP's Kitchen.
It really is the Pedley empire. We've got Tony Pedley, the container magnate.
It's like something out of Only Fools and Horses. On his business card, it says a space technician. He's a space technician. and it's technically right.
It's not false advertising though, really, is it? Because if it's a storage yard,
No.
he is technically a technician of space.
Space. Exactly.
Frame to frame.
It'd be quite interesting for people, if they've seen Captain America the First Avenger, which I loved, to go back and watch The Rocketeer, because you'll think, oh wow, there is actually a lot to be shared between the two films, not just the period in which they're set, but also that general sense of innocent, sort of exuberant fun.
American optimism.
Yeah.
Well. So you've got Howard Hughes in The Rocketeer, that's sort of the great inventor. He's the one that's invented this rocket jetpack. And just the idea that, similar to something like Tomorrowland, in that sense of we can look forward with optimism, we're going to use all of these great technical advancements and we're going to use them all for good. And that's something that I think The Rocketeer has. And I think that's something that it shares with Captain America.
The Sanctuary, a Star Trek, politics and economics podcast.
Not only were his ideas seductive because of this idea of individual freedom, but because they, in fits and starts and not in a smooth road, his words were more or less borne out in the ensuing decades. And so the show kind of takes that as a premise, that the freedom of the individual to make decisions about their own time, their own resources, is what promotes, at least it suggests what a utopia might look like.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod, and we are part of the We Made This podcast network, which can be found online at wemadethispod.com or on Twitter at We Made This Pod.